Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Hilltop Pillbox here in Abbotsford, British Columbia, Canada. And here we are. It's actually Remembrance Day, and unfortunately, everybody's busy today. Some folks are out at Remembrance Day ceremonies. Other people are just away for the weekend. It is a long weekend, so some have taken that opportunity to travel. I actually just got back from Alberta. My nephew got married, so to he and his lovely wife, congratulations. Many happy years together. So it was tough to get people together to play this weekend, unfortunately. We're going to try again, hopefully in not too distant future, but basketball season is fast approaching, and I'm going to be reffing basketball quite a bit. So, hey, it's good I can lose the weight and, hopefully stay in a little bit of shape. So here we have Global War 1939. This is from Historical Board Gaming. And I've said it before and I'll say it again. This is probably my favorite World War II epic style game. Of course, everybody's got a favorite, and it always, a lot of people, well, what about this? What about that? Hey, I'm taking nothing away from the 36 to 45 Global War. That's Historical Board Gaming's magnum opus, I think, of games. And it's part of a series, actually. It's going to run from the mid-19th century all the way to 2025. And it's a great game in and of itself, and just so many iterations, and so many... Iterations isn't the word. Expansions, I'll say, but that word gets overused sometimes. But so many different units and markers and different... rules that you can or cannot implement depending on what you want to do. You can start at different times where the setups will be different. You can have map overlays, all that kind of stuff. Well, this one here is their first big World War II offering, and 1939, and that's when it starts, 1939. And I've got a few videos about this bad boy out on my channel here, so you can look through for 1939. What the setup I have here is the one that's out of the latest version. I haven't added anything. Sometimes we will populate any of the strict neutrals that actually have dollar value to them. IPP value. They say IPC with Axis and Allies games, but IPP for these guys. But I'm going to do it as the exact setup here. And then when we're able to play, it'll be a right out of the box rules setup. A couple of fun things about this. Here's the chart of the money. So you can see Germany's just got 24, Japan's got 41, it's a monster already, and Italy 26. But then you see Russia is 0, and if you look down here, you see America's at 0, and some others are pretty low. You got 33, 23, 10, 10, 3, and 12. And so on the surface, it looks like the Allies actually have a little bit more money possible flowing around, because those zeros aren't going to last. Well, what happens there is, this is a D12 system. And so you grab a couple of D12s and you roll them at the Soviet Union turn, and you add that, and that's what they're going to make on the first round. And then you add it to the second, add it to the third. And once they get to 48, they can be at war, unless they've already been attacked by then, which they might be. America does the same thing. America also will be rolling. They start at 0 and roll. Now, they do start with 20 bucks, America, and the Soviet Union, I forget how much they start with. Let's see here. I think they start with 40 or something. 48. There you go. No, 15. Yeah, it's even worse than America. So they start with 15. America starts with 20. And America's pretty bare bones here. They have not a bad little fleet. You look at that and you say that's not too bad until you go around and see all the Japanese boats. You see that the Japanese indeed have a much stronger fleet. At the start of the war, the Japanese are fighting nationalist China. Okay? They are not fighting communist China, which is that small 2 thing. And you can see it's worth 3. But the communist Chinese, every round, will just put on 1 man. They don't actually collect an income. They put on 1 man, as long as they have a territory. And if any of the communist Chinese troops go into another territory, that actually becomes communist Chinese. Okay? And it just stays that way. So they're taking money from nationalist China, and it's not being put to use. So not always a good idea. The Japanese have their pumpkin colored stuff, but they also have a few red units. You'll notice that there's some red. These are what are called veteran troops. So you got veteran soldiers there, and you got veteran fighters. Veteran soldier there, and right there you got some more. And they just attack better and defend better, and you can't build them. They're just folks that have been doing war for so long. Obviously, they're going to have a leg up on most other people. The Dutch have a pretty strong group down here. They've got a nice little fleet, and they have some decent money in Axis and Allies, of course. It's called the Money Islands, and that ain't lying down here. They got quite a bit going on. It's 16 bucks, I think. it's 10, 13, 14, 15, yeah, 16 bucks worth of Dutch islands. So that's another interesting thing. French Indochina and Saigon are empty. The Japanese tend to just drop in there and grab it after France is fallen, because these are French colonies, of course. Siam can be activated by the Japanese at any time, and they also just put on one troop every turn. They do have a fighter and a destroyer, but they cannot be rebuilt. Another neat thing about this game, which I really like, are the French Foreign Legion. So you have these 7 units out here in Africa. They attack a little better than other units. Most of the units you have to roll a 2 on a d12. So 1 in 6, typical Axis and Allies odds. These folks here, they attack at a 3 though, so it's a 50% increase. And it's 25% chance of getting a hit instead of 17 or so. So that's pretty cool. Another thing that happens is when Paris falls, you roll for all the remaining French boats. You can see there's some decent fleet going on here. And they'll either get scuttled, or they'll go to an Allied port and become a British ship, or they will become a German ship, or they will become a Vichy ship. Vichy will be headquartered in Marseille, and also in any other place, because what you do is you roll a die. I didn't get my die ready here. A little short-sighted of me here. Oh, I tell you, if I was producing a movie here, I'd be in a lot of trouble. All right. So what we have here are we have Vichy and Free French dice. So when you roll a die, if you roll a 1 to a 6, I believe it becomes Vichy. So if we were rolling for Rio de Oro and we roll a 1 to a 6, it would become Vichy. And then the Germans would actually collect this income and have access to this naval port. But if it were Free French, then the British will actually get this money and access to the naval port. So it's pretty important. So you roll for each and every French territory. Sometimes what we do is we actually call this one territory and call this one territory. But sometimes we say, nope, we're going to do every single one and see how they turn out. Okay. And that includes these ones over here. Right? So if they go Vichy, the Germans will actually take that money until the Japanese move in. But the Chinese are allowed to go into here and steal that too. So, but they're going to have their own problems. And you might be looking at this saying, boy, they're pretty thin here. But there are a lot of transports. Okay? They've got 6 transports to start on the board, and they all have things to pick up and drop off. So they can do a lot of damage. And they got loaded carriers, battleships, cruisers, lots of destroyers, lots of air power. So they tend to mash over China pretty quickly here. And we're going to pause for station identification. My wife is bringing me a treat. Okay, we're back, and it wasn't really a treat. It's cookie dough, but she's freezing it in the freezer here. So, yeah, I didn't get any cookies. So, what a ripoff. Anyway, what was I talking about there? Talking about, Vichy, France, and all that kind of stuff. Let's see here. French, Siam, Dutch, China. China's going to have problems. That's right. So yeah, China's got a lot of guys here, but they have a very fragile income, as they are supposed to in all of these games. And the Japanese do have a lot of units that they can pick up, just instantly zorch them over to here. So they do that. You also see Hong Kong is very exposed, as is Singapore. You'll notice that some of these places have what are called fortifications. So you can see one in Cairo here. And we have one in Tobruk. There's one in Malta. There's one in Gibraltar. A whole bunch in there. And what they do is they will house up to 10 infantry and make those infantry 1 pip better on defense for the first round. Alright, which is very cool. And that you can attack from any direction and it doesn't matter, and they will help the infantry. It doesn't matter what you attack with. And then you have the coastal guns, of which we have one here, and we have one in Vladivostok for the Soviets. And all they do is defend against amphibious assaults, which is what they built Singapore's defenses around, was to repel amphibious assaults of the Japanese Navy. And the Japanese decided to come down the peninsula, and that was that. Right? Singapore was done pretty quickly because of it. Actually outnumbered the Japanese by quite a bit, but Japanese had the air power and the artillery, and the people in Singapore could not get any reinforcements because they lost their battleships. So, but that's a story for another time. But yeah, the coastal guns, no effect. So when the Japanese, if they come from here, then they don't get a shot. And a big point of contention is also, does it help if they land here? Well, it does, because the coastal gun is not, it's only on this spot, so it could be anywhere. I stick it on the end here just as a reminder, in case the Japanese player is crazy enough to try. Basically, it gets free shots at whoever's coming in at a 5 or less. Two dice at a 5 on a d12. Another fun bit of stuff are the pro-Allied and pro-Axis countries that exist. So here we have, Brazil, pro-Allied, and we have Argentina, pro-Axis, and they just have some guys in there. And on turn 2, turn 4, turn 6, turn 8, you add 1 infantry to each of these capitals if they haven't been activated yet. So you head people down here and drop a guy off in here, and these all become yours, and you can start collecting the income, and then you can invade here if you want. Okay, a lot of fun. Oddly enough, Canada is the country that tends to liberate Brazil. Who knew? But that's only typically if these U-boats aren't able to sink the Canadian destroyer and the 2 transports there, which they tend to do. But who knows, if the dice are on their side, the Canadians can sometimes be down here very quickly to liberate. So they can move 3 out of a port, so they go 1, 2, 3, they're here, they can drop off in Boa Vista and then move in and take the country. Speaking of U-boats, these bad boys, they have a neat little bonus to them. Whenever they attack, and there's about 2 of them, they attack at a 5. If there's just 1, it attacks at a 4. So they try to put the wolf pack together whenever they attack, just to give them that extra pip of attack power. We also have, you can see the airborne guy in there. Same rules as most of you are used to. You got to have a bomber and an airfield. 36 uses transports, of course, but in this iteration, is just use your heavy bombers, your strap bombers, and you can pick up an airborne fella and drop him off. So that guy is usually coupled with some armor and another guy, and they go on a transport here and they go take Oslo in the first round. Lots of NOs, national objectives, for bonus money. In fact, the Soviets and the Germans, they both get some cash. Actually, it's been a while. I know the Soviets get some cash, but if they're not at war with Germany. Which brings up another neat point. There's so many really neat kind of stories within the story, the game within the game. You have Finland here. In Finland, the Germans can activate Finland, and the Russians and the Finns, and even German units that are there, can fight over these 3 territories, and it doesn't mean the Russians and the Germans are now at war. So you can have, it's almost, I don't want to call it a proxy war, but it's just kind of a sideshow. It gives you something to do in Russia, I guess, if nothing's going on. Japanese tend to leave the Soviets alone over here. There's not much money to be had. Vladivostok's worth 2, and we got about 6 more, but you're really spread out to get it. Novosibirsk, here's another neat thing about the game. That's a dry erase marker. That's not like a early ICBM or something. Novosibirsk is worth 3, but it also has a major factory. You can build up to 10 units there. And they start with a nice little army. Right? There's like 6 troops. There's 4 or 5 tanks and 3 artillery that you can choose to send either way. So if the Japanese are getting uppity, you can go over there. And if the Germans are coming, then you send them there. Truth be told, most often the tanks go screaming over here, and the Russian troops start walking that way. And the artillery start going that way, but not all the time. Sometimes the tanks go as well. Convoying. Convoying in this game is very, very simple. Here we have a convoy zone. This one matches up with Far East Command. Okay. And it's worth 2, so it is part of their income. But if the Japanese, or the Germans, heaven forbid, but if the Japanese get a warship into there, transports don't count, they will cut that off. They don't take the money, they just stop the Far East Command, in this case, from getting any. The Allies have a lot of convoy zones in the Atlantic. They own all of them. There's one in the Med that's for the Italians, and that's crucial for the Italians. If the Italians lose this and can't get it back, they're in trouble. Something bad is happening for them. Okay, so that's one they tend to fight over quite a bit. The Soviets have one up here. This is kind of like the Archangel convoy. That one up there. Ooh, that's tough to zoom in on. And then the Japanese have some over here. They've got 11 points worth of convoy zones. The Americans have got some monster convoy zones. They got 15 bucks here, and then they've got another 10 bucks, I believe, over here. So $25 of American budget is in the sea. So for the Axis player on this one, if you want to really hurt the Americans, right before you attack them and bring them into the war, plant some warships in all those zones, and it'll take them some time, money, and energy to dig them out of there. So maybe not so much in the Atlantic, because the Brits can help out, but out here you're pretty much on your own. Anzacs here, but they're, as you can see, not a lot of stuff. They do scoop this fleet, typically, when Holland falls. These will become pro-allied, which means the first ship to go in claims them, and the first ship will be them. If any other ship goes in, they have to fight, because they'd be pro-allied as soon as their capital falls. I don't know if there's much else to do. No Mongolian rule in this, and all the strict neutrals just defend themselves. So there's free money laying around. In the out-of-box version, like I said, we typically populate these ones here so that, you know, Britain can't just go here and take 1, take 2. But in the rules, they can. Just kind of free money. So you can do that. But sometimes having that guy over here when you need him over here can be the difference. So the German minor neutrals, minor Axis, we've talked about Finland already. Hungary and Romania can get activated on the first round by a mech, just zips right through and can activate both of them. And then Bulgaria can get activated the next round. And, well, the next movement, we'll talk about that too. And they can't attack Yugoslavia until, well, Bulgaria can't attack until Yugoslavia has been taken, and then you use them to help take Greece. The Brits by this time typically have put stuff in there. Now you look at this and you see, well, the Brits have not a bad force here. They've got enough stuff that they could come up here and probably take this. There is scrambling, but there's no fighters at the air base, so that doesn't help unless Germany plops some down there, which they tend to. But Britain and Italy's not even in the war to start the game, so the Brits can't attack them. The Italians go into the war at the start of their first turn, assuming that Paris has fallen. If Paris hasn't fallen, then the Italians can't come into the war, but that has only happened once. And that was just a pure disaster for Germany. Yeah, so this fleet here, there's a lot of different things you can do with it. And also, you have to depend on what these rolls are, right? because if they roll and all these ships or a bunch of them become pro-Axis, and they'd stay here and become German, because this becomes Vichy France, right? If it becomes Vichy, it could become Free French, and then the Germans can take it. But typically these become Axis. And if they become Allied, they'd go to the nearest Allied port, which is over here, and that's big trouble for the Italians. So that first round, which you will see shortly, the end result of it, really helps dictate the game as to how things go. I think that's pretty much all I want to say. Switzerland is a great big fortress. It's only worth 1. And we put 11 guys on there with 2 bunkers and a fighter. So typically you're only supposed to have 6 guys in there and 2 bunkers and a fighter. But we thought let's just make a real deterrent. But there really is no reason to take Switzerland. It's probably why they were able to remain neutral, right? No reason to take Switzerland. Just go around it. It's probably easier anyway. So, yeah, I don't think there's much else. Yeah, these fleets go to whomever gets into the capital to assist. So if the Germans attack Barcelona, and then the Brits are able to get into the capital, they can take the ships. If Madrid falls, then these ships are rolled for. Most of the time they get scuttled, but sometimes they'll go to your side, sometimes they go to the other. So there's always some very different situations that creep up. That's what makes the game so entertaining. You're just never sure what round 2 is going to look like. Round 1 can be very different. I guess the last thing I'll talk about is the good old Graf Spee, which I think I've mentioned on previous videos. Starts here, and the Germans, I guess this will be the part, let's say the last part A and part B. The Germans get a second impulse, is what it's called, on the first round, which means they can attack. So they'll do their combat moves, do the combat, do a non-combat move, and then they'll place their builds at their factories. Then they get to do another combat move, another round of combat, and another round of non-combat movement. So they get that double impulse. So in that time, they should take Paris, and they should take Warsaw. The Soviets are allowed to attack in the back here, as they did, and the Germans can take the West Poland and Warsaw. And if that doesn't happen, more money basically goes to the Brits, and they can put some more hurt on the Germans. But the Germans start with, I think it's 11 U-boats on the board, and they tend to build a couple every round. They're cheap for them; they're only $5. So that's crazy, but they're going to have a lot of problems on the mainland too. So they need to try to starve out the Brits. But down here, back to the Graf Spee. So on that first impulse, it'll come over here. This is not always has to happen, but if they don't, if the Graf Spee doesn't, it's just going to get trapped down here. These can move 3, these can move 2, so you could have 4 destroyers and a sub attacking them. And so goes here, attacks, and if he wins this on the first round, he can kill those 2 destroyers, and he can come down here and just knock out the transport for free. This transport is more annoying than I care to tell you. You know, if the Graf Spee gets sunk, and it usually does. Sometimes it takes both these guys with them. Sometimes it takes both of them. But if these 2 destroyers survive, or 2 transports survive, and start picking these guys up here and coming over here and liberating this, there's a bit of money here to be had. And the Germans have nothing that they can afford to send down here. Very important ship. If it comes here and kills this, and this is what it looks like at the end of round 1, then there's very little chance for the Canadians to do a lot down here if their stuff gets sunk there. And then South America tends to remain a bit of a ghost town, and sometimes this bad boy will come over here and even try to link up with the Japanese, which is always a hoot when that happens. So, yeah, but that's pretty much it for the explanation of the game. And we'll get going here and let you know how it goes. Nice little thing here. We got Fort Drum. He's out on that island there. I think it was in Manila Bay. Sorry, I don't know. Been a while since I've read up on that. But that's pretty much it. Okay, so round 1's going to be coming up shortly after this. And yeah, wish me luck in being able to get some guys over here soon. Alright, talk to you in just a minute. Alright, so we're done Germany's first turn, which includes their first and second impulses. And we're just going to let you know what happened, because the board will undoubtedly change a whole lot after Britain and Russia go. And even the French in Africa are going to stir some things up. So we'll just let you know what happened here. Well, Germany had an excellent first round. I haven't seen it go that smoothly for them in a long time. They didn't take many losses anywhere. They took none in Norway. They brought the artillery and the man as well as the paratrooper up here, and they took out the fort and took out the infantry waiting there. Still have to roll for these. Forgot to do that. And then we've got all the aircraft left. They lost no aircraft, so they still have 12 aircraft on the board. And Paris fell, and there is tons of stuff left over. Still infantry left, and that's pretty rare. But the other thing that Germany got, as you'll notice, is some boats. So there were 5 French boats here. A transport, a sub, and a battleship and 2 destroyers. And you have to roll a 1 or a 2 on a D12 for the Germans to take it. We did that 3 times. Germany collected all 3 of those ships. Britain got the transport, which goes there, and there's no conflict, no combat because of that, though, because it's done in a non-combat phase. This German fleet survived quite well. Still actually has 4 subs left, a battleship, a cruiser, and 2 destroyers. And we saw Luftflotte. What is Luftflotte 4 up here? I'm not sure. I can't remember. It's been so long since I've looked at that stuff. But the Norwegian wing of the Luftwaffe. Denmark, of course, fell. Holland fell. Took no casualties. They took Poland. Took a couple of hits on the chin here, but nothing huge. They kept their tanks. And they did lose, I think, 3 men total in both battles. So that's not very bad. And they also got, of course, Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria all activated. So that's an extra $9 for them there. They didn't go into Finland right now, though. They said, we're going to make sure we take Norway. So that's what they got there. In the Med, they actually also got these 3 ships from the French fleet. So the Germans won 6 ships, totaling about, I don't know, 3 destroyers. That's times 7, 21, 41, 50, about $60, $65 worth of boats for free. Yes, they did all right there. Their subs repositioned. They sank the Canadian fleet here. They did lose 1 sub, but then they scattered. They sent one up here, and oh, wait a second. Can't make it that far. But they sent one to the Canadian zone here, and then they sent one down to the British zone here. The only spot where the Germans had any sort of trouble at all was here. They sent 3 U-boats after 2 destroyers and a sub. Cruiser wasn't there. So 2 destroyers and a sub were there, and they failed. They took their 3 shots, and they only got 1 hit, and then both destroyers fired back and sank 2 subs. So the Germans decided to withdraw. This cruiser was commandeered from there. Very strange, folks. Out of about a dozen rolls for fleets, they only scuttled 4 ships, and the other 8 ended up going places. So the British got a cruiser there, and the British got a submarine over in Cairo. So that's going to change a little bit, put a little bit more pressure on the Med here for the British. Down in the south here, we put the boxes in the way here. Got to clean this up a bit. The Graf Spee came over to attack the 2 destroyers here and got a hit, but then one of the destroyers sank the Graf Spee. So the British have a little reprieve here. They got a destroyer transport, and South Africa still has a transport. So they'll be able to come and get Liberia. It's an extra $1. And then come across and take that, so the Canadians who no longer have any boats don't have to worry about that. But that's pretty much it. That's just the German turn. Wanted to show you what it looked like. And now we're going to move on. It's going to be Japan's turn. And that's how this game goes. It goes Japan, or sorry, pardon me, Germany, then Japan, and then the Soviet Union. And Communist China after that. And then you have the UK, France, and the minor allies. Then you have the United States and nationalist China. And then you have the lowly Italians. So if you look at it on the face of it, the Axis have 3 turns in a row. They have Italy, Germany, Japan, but then the Allies send all their forces at the same time. So it's if you work together, you can really do some nasty can openers on your enemies. But you got to work together, and it's a little easier for the Allies to work together than it is for the Axis, because the main powers of the Axis, of course, are worlds apart. But the Allies, with the British, once the Americans get into it and the Soviets get into it, they can really start hammering down. But we're going to do the Japanese turn and the rest of them, actually. And then we'll let you know how the last bit of turn 1 ended up. I wanted to show you the Vichy and Free French areas. So northern Algeria went Vichy, which made the Free French scatter. They can't stay in Vichy territory. So when you roll a Vichy territory, they have to skedaddle. And so if Tunisia had been Vichy, these guys here would have had nowhere to go, and they would have just been eliminated from the game. So luckily for them, it went Free French. This all went Vichy. Rio de Oro, which is worth $1, went Free French. And remember, all the Free French ones, if there's any money, that goes to the British. Central Africa is all Vichy. Madagascar went Free French, and it's not worth anything, but it's a great place if it's Vichy. It's a great place for Japanese bombers to land once they start patrolling over here. This all went Free French, but that will definitely disappear on the Japanese turn, because they don't want the Brits getting that for $4. And then over here, these 2 spots actually split. Sometimes we roll them as 1. We decided to roll them as 2 today. So there we go. So that's just the first round for Germany. Looking at the board, there's no real change to anybody but Germany, because they're not at war with anybody as far as territory goes right now. But you can see they got 61 there, 51 base, 10 bonus. 5 of that is for the good fortune they had in Norway, and the other 5 is for being at peace with the Soviet Union. And then they'll get another 10 from France, because France, although France has 20 production, they only start with $10, just because Germany, you don't want them taking all their, a whole whack of money at the start here. So, all right, well, we'll leave you to the tunes of Boston, and we'll let you know how Japan fares on round 1 of 1939. All right, so here we are. A little bit of Tom Cochrane. And you can see the British came over, took Brazil here, liberated it, and got a coastal battleship and a transport out of the deal. And there's been quite a bit of action here, and you'll notice that the British destroyers and cruiser came out. Another destroyer came out to here. More destroyers came here and here. These ones were just built. This one was just built. And up here, that German fleet is gone. But not without taking a few things with it. So, sank a couple of subs, or a sub and a cruiser, I think. I can't remember. But they damaged all 3 of these ships. Now you're wondering, where are these from? Well, these are from the Norwegian Navy, which we hadn't rolled for yet. We rolled, and Britain actually got these 2 bad boys, and everything else got scuttled. So that was nice for the Brits, but their home fleet battleship did take it on the chin, and so we got this left for the Brits. Okay, built a couple destroyers here. Put one here as a blocker because, of course, all these aircraft can get to these ships, and they didn't want these ships joining in the fun. Now, it's highly likely that the Germans are going to use these to just finish off the rest of this fleet, but the Brits can scramble 3 fighters. So it could be very costly to the Luftwaffe as well. And, well, we'll see what the Germans decide to do. They got a stack of cash. And the Brits did sweep the Atlantic clean of subs, so they did get 5-point bonus for that. So there you go. The Soviets did not attack Finland, but they did place their entire build, 5 men, right here. And Karelia, you'll notice that in this version, Karelia has a factory, but Leningrad does not. Leningrad is the victory city. So this is just kind of like a naked factory up here that if the Germans decide to push, they'll typically get this. Now, the Russians have this wonderful thing, well, everybody has it, but the Russians tend to use it most often, scorched earth. And that's where if they feel like the Germans are closing in, they can just torch facilities, they can torch the factories, so that the Germans have nothing when they come through. Obviously, a little bit of a tip of the hat to actual history. Not much else to show you up here. You've seen everything there already. The Canadians saved their money this round, but the British did send a transport over. This is the one they got from the rolls there with the French, with the Vichy rolls and Free France rolls, and they ended up keeping that one. So they put it there, and then on their turn they non-combat over to Canada, and they'll try to pick these folks up, I guess, and bring them over. So the British Navy, there's a good chance this will be gone this turn, but they do have a few destroyers. That'll probably be dead, but they got 4 destroyers that are kind of out of reach. They could send the Navy up here to attack it, but then they can scramble 5 fighters to defend that side, so who knows. The Americans built nothing here, and then there's 3 more ships there, coastal battleships, so the Royal Navy's actually in pretty good shape. Okay, the Free French came over and liberated northern Algeria, so Britain is actually making quite a bit of money. We'll show you the board in just a moment. South Africa moved up a bit here. The South African transport is the one that was used to liberate there. And anything captured by South Africa goes to Great Britain. Canada can actually add to her money by taking territories, but South Africa cannot. I'm just going to limit that to $3 per round as long as they hold Rhodesia and South Africa. The Italians ran into a bit of a problem here because the British put up a destroyer here as a blocker, and of course they inherited the Greek fleet when they took Greece on their non-combat move at the end of their turn. So they got a couple bucks for it, plus they inherited a few things, plus they inherited a coastal battleship and a couple destroyers. So that blocked the Italians there, and there was a destroyer here, so the Italians had to take care of that before they can maybe take a shot at that fleet, which they might not do if this is all combined, but they still might. They've got decent air power here. So we'll see what happens there on the next round. They did take Lower Egypt to deny the UK the 5-point bonus for holding all of her original territories on the western side of the board. Alright, coming over here, not much else to say. Know that all of these pro-Axis, pro-Allied, that includes Argentina being a pro-Axis, Yugoslavia being pro-Allied, they're all going to get an extra man as we go into round 2. So there you go, that'll pump those up a bit. The Japanese didn't get into Siam this turn, but they did get in everywhere else, and they just really thrashed about on the Chinese. They actually went and took communist China territory here. But they took this and didn't lose anything, took this and didn't lose anything, but then bad things started to happen, and they ended up losing some stuff here, and here. They actually lost some aircraft in order to take these, and then the Chinese just took this one back. Lost a man doing it, but the Japanese went full China on this one. We're going to see if that works out for them. It looks pretty good off the start. You got this big stack to deal with, but if Japan is willing to sacrifice planes in order to destroy Chinese resistance, and then they don't have to worry about this part of the map, and they can just head down this way and head up that way, might be an even trade. They did build a factory in Shanghai, so they're ready to go there. Over on this side here, the Americans decided to spend their money on a couple of fighters. So you can see over here, they built a couple fighters, and they brought their fleet over this way. Now you're wondering, well, why in the world would the Americans do that? Well, because the Japanese have this nasty little thing called a sneak attack. Germans have it as well when they attack Russia in one territory. On their first attack, they attack at a +1 and the Russians are -1, but that's only in one territory on one turn. The Japanese get 3 sneak attacks, and after those sneak attacks, all those units that attack can then do a non-combat move. Typically you can't. So you'll see some great expansion on those 2 turns. The turn they have the sneak attack and the following turn, because everything's moved twice as far. But the other thing is that when they use one of the sneak attacks on the American Navy, all the American ships do not shoot back on the first round. They are sitting ducks. And then for the rest of that battle, they're -2. So if we look here, you know, battleships are usually at 8. This is a 6. This is usually a 2. And this is a 4, right? And that doesn't defend, of course. So this would be a 6. This would be a 4. That would be, we always say 1. You can at least shoot back. And this would be a 2. Well, that's not going to do well when you have everything coming in to clobber it. And they get 3 different spots they can do that attack in on the Americans. So I've said it before, in games like this, the American players got to be really careful. Yeah, just be aware of that. Don't stack up your Navy in this game if you're the Americans. Now, there are rules that say you have to stay, or finish your move, pardon me, beside American territory of some kind. So you see the lone destroyer out here. He's not trying to do anything but try to get home before that Japanese sneak attack. And he'll probably make it because the sneak attack isn't within range. But he can head over to the Hawaiian Islands and then home. Otherwise he would have just died. He was here in 92. That's where he starts the game. And so the Japanese are very, very, very scary. So you got to be careful with them. This round, though, they built a factory and built some infantry. That's what they decided to build, and that's it. So, no real navy to speak of there. They just branched out the one that they have. Yeah, so that's it there. I think that's pretty much it. Anzac saved her money, and Anzac gets a nice bonus here, living on this side of the world, because when after Holland fell, they just came in here and they were able to take all the Dutch ships, and they get $1 for New Guinea, and they came over and got $2 for the Dutch Indies, the East Indies. Okay, and FEC, Far East Command, just came down here and took Sumatra. Okay, and that's pretty much the whole show right there. They've just tried to get their numbers up. Now what we're going to do is we're going to see the board here. Take a look. See, Germany is at 51 plus 10 bonus. And Japan's at 50, was at 51 until they lost that one spot to the nationalist Chinese. And the Italians are at 27. Right, so that's just 1 up, of course, from their pre-war value. And if you're wondering why they didn't build a whole bunch of neat stuff, they only start with $15. So they spent 12 and they're saving some. So Russia did not roll well. They rolled a 13. I guess that's pretty average. The Brits are doing all right. They get all that money from the Free French territories, and then they got Brazil as well. And also came down, I forgot to point this out, came down and took Medina. We're going to give that a whirl and see if the Allies can use the extra bucks. Okay. So they got a couple extra bucks just around the board. Greece is worth a couple as well, of course. Far East Command took Sumatra, so the extra 4. We know that the Anzac are at 18. It should actually read 13 plus 3. I got kind of lazy there. But they have 13, and then the plus, not 3, pardon me, plus 5. 13 plus 5, because they'll have 5 because the Allies own all of this stuff down here. All of these islands, the island chains, like the Solomons, Rabaul, New Guinea, and that. So if they hold on to those, they will retain that $5 bonus. And the thing is to start right now, the Japanese, they've got 5 transports in here. But there is no way on earth a Japanese player is going to load them up and come down here. Because then the nationalist Chinese will have a massive reprieve and just be so strong that the Japanese won't have a chance to take it back. And by the time America's in the war. So, and there's no transports here for the Japanese to use. Some games I know employ the destroyers carry infantry. We're not doing that in today's game. Looking at Canada, Canada gets a +3 because they got it last turn. They might not get it this turn because the Brits had all their territory. And Canada saved her money on the first round. She got 23 to spend next round. South Africa is always at 3. That's why there's a circle around it. Don't touch that. America rolled a 20 and added to the 5 that they get for Germany attacking France. They're now at 25. They need to get to 80 before they're in the war. So you got a ways to go. $55 to go. But when the Germans attack Russia, that goes up. When the Germans, if the Germans actually attack anything on the island of Great Britain, it's a big jump. When Japan opens up the door here on FEC or the Money Islands or Anzac, then that's a big jump, $25 for the Americans. So if they roll well, they can be in on turn 3. That's the earliest I've seen them in as turn 3. It's usually turn 4, sometimes as late as turn 6. That was a huge win for the Axis. We remember that one. That was a pretty easy win actually for the Axis because they didn't have to worry, and the Americans kept rolling like 3 and 5. So yeah, they had some troubles. But anyway, that's how the map looks now. So the Americans are a bit dispersed, just in case something crazy was going to happen. They've evacuated Midway. They took the Marine over to the Pacific Northwest. Yeah, it's nice this time of year, I guess. And Anzac's got some naval power here that the Japanese may have to take a look at. But again, Anzac's pretty poor. I mean, $18 is nice, but you're not going to be building anything huge. And at this time, I don't believe that they can build capital ships. I will have to take a look at the rules for that. That's been a while. Same with Calcutta. I think Calcutta might be able to, but after it's a major factory. So, because right now these are both miners here and in Sydney, so they can only build 3 units at a time. So Calcutta will definitely bump that up, but she only had $16 on round 1, and it cost 20 to make that into a major, so couldn't do it if she wanted. Alright, well there you go. That's the first round. The Axis are marching through Eastern and Western Europe unabated, and they're going to head for Southern Europe, I think, on the next round, and possibly start a little bit of a fun little proxy type war up here in the Finnish theater, and we'll see what happens after that. We'll see if the Brits can hang on to their navy. If they're able to fix that, they'll have 3 battleships out there, so I don't think the Germans want that. So we'll see, though, what the Luftwaffe and the Kriegsmarine and all the rest do. And we'll talk to you as soon as that round 2 it gets going. We might stop after the German turn to take a breath and see what happened, or we might wait till the end. You'll find out right after this. Well, hello folks, and we are at the end of round 2 here in our game of 1939. It's actually been a couple of days since the last filming, just because of how busy everybody is, and I'm just going to wrap up. Everybody's gone now, so I'm just going to wrap up and hopefully I remember everything. This game, for some reason, is taking a long time. I think people are really working through some stuff, so we'll just we'll take you through it here. Well, let's start off in the Atlantic. As you can see, the submarines are gone, and you can see that British fleet is gone, and the German little mini fleet is gone. It was a bloodbath out here, if there's that's the right word for it. It was complete and utter chaos. The British, who built some destroyers and gathered some up from around, have moved everything back home, and they attacked the British player's messy. They attacked the German fleet, had moved in here to kill a destroyer, and thought they would plant a fighter here as some sort of protection, but then Britain sent absolutely everything. 5 fighters, 2 bombers, 3 destroyers, and a cruiser at that, and actually only ended up taking 1 hit. The German Luftflotte 5, I think. I gotta look that up. Anyway, they came here and sank the British fleet, except for the 1 cruiser, which ended up coming down here because they had taken some hits. But they got rid of all the battleships. There were the 3 battleships there, 2 regular and 1 coastal, and they wanted to get rid of that. So that was that. The Canadians had a British transport come over here and brought it back with a couple of Canadian troops there. Come and teach the Brits how to play hockey or something, I don't know. Germany, of course, expanded through France, now owns all of France. Took Yugoslavia using their minor allies, only lost 1 German infantry, but lost a few other little pieces, but not many, to the Yugoslavs. Greece is still in British hands, though, but probably not for the next round. That'll probably be it. The Germans did move their stacks of stuff from Paris across, and the reasons the Germans did so well in Paris, of course, is because they didn't take Yugoslavia on the first turn. We were trying to figure out why was it so easy this time, and now we figured it out. We're like, oh yeah. So over here, Germany finally activated Finland, but you can see the Russians have decided to come on in and cause some grief, and they took this from Finland. Now remember, they can fight on Finnish soil without making the Germans and the Russians in a state of war. Okay? That's pretty much it for Europe. South America, of course, Brazil exploded here and took the rest of those places, and dropped a couple of guys off in Liberia in order to collect Liberia, which now has 2 people because it's the second round. And Argentina went up, of course, but highly unlikely they'll get activated considering Germany doesn't have a single boat in the Atlantic. They moved their fleet over here, probably for some air protection. You'll see the French Foreign Legion has decided to move into Tripoli with force, and the Italians vacated. Now the Italians had moved into here and taken it, but then they got crushed. And you'll notice that the only boats left in the Med here, anyway, are British. They're all pretty banged up, of course. They're only actually 5 hits away from losing everything here. And Germany last round sent some planes down here hoping to help the Italians. Now they may have to just use them to try to crush what's left of the British fleet in the Med. That's an ugly story. Italy rolled very poorly in the battle. They did kill a couple of things, but then they attacked with their entire air force, and all they had left after the first round was a bomber, and they only killed a couple of things. So, yeah, the Allies have done pretty well on that front. The factory, of course, built here, and the Italians built a factory. Of course, they have to, because there's no way they're going to be able to build up a transport fleet on their money, which is actually dwindling thanks to the French Foreign Legion. The British took the rest of the Arabian Peninsula that is worth IPPs. Over here we have Calcutta, which of course has built a fortification, and last round they have to build 3 men to start, which they did, and a couple of them actually got taken over here by this transport, and there was a lone guy here because the British had a failed attempt on Italian Somaliland, 2 guys on 1. And after the first Italian hit, the British backed up, of course. And but then they built 3 tanks as well, because they saved all their money from the first round, and they had a lot of money, and they can only build 3 units anyway. The British are allowed to build 2 units there, so they built 2 tanks. So now they actually have 5 tanks in there, and 4 men. So it's nothing to sneeze at, especially in this part of the world where getting tanks on the ground is difficult. And Japanese tanks cost more and fight worse. So the Japanese rarely build tanks. They start the game with 1, and they usually never build one. But they do build the mechanized because they can tow the artillery pieces. Everybody's can, but for the Japanese, that just gives more fodder for anything because they still have their quite healthy air force. Chinese built a few guys here and stacked them up, but have retreated in order to save for later. Communist China moved into Yan'an. It was vacant, so they just moved in. Oh no, yeah, it was vacant because the Japanese had moved out by then. Actually, the Japanese moved down here and took it. It was a freebie, just one guy, and then the Chinese backed up from Shensi in order to kill that guy. So Japanese are definitely moving forward. They got a lot of guys down here. They built a factory in Saigon. They activated Siam. So there's that. But FEC, Far East Command, has also spread its tiny wings and have taken Sumatra and Borneo for an extra $8 a round, which if Japan doesn't do something about, that will make India fairly impervious in about 3 rounds. The Anzac have also headed out and have taken some territory again. They took this in the first round and then moved them up there in this last round. They left their fighter in New Guinea, and they brought this mostly Dutch fleet that they liberated down here. So it's on a port, but it's able to sortie, of course, 3 spaces. So it can go quite a ways. It can match whatever the Caroline Islands wants to do if they want to come down here. They built a transport and a couple of guys, so they've got 2 transports worth of things here. It doesn't sound like a lot, but in the Pacific that can actually cause some grief. The Americans didn't really do much. They built a transport and a couple of guys over there, and here they just built a destroyer and moved another one out to Hawaii, thinking that they're spreading out their fleet a bit in case the Japanese try a sneak attack. But the Japanese really aren't in a position to do much of a sneak attack right now. They could bring everybody into Hawaii, but that's as far as they can go. So that's pretty much it for this, and we're gonna hopefully get the guys together again pretty soon to finish off the rest of this. But for you, it's going to be the blink of an eye. I don't think there's anything else I'm really missing here. Oh, the British built a tank down here as well because they can build one thing in South Africa and they could build a couple things in Canada, and we saw that they built a couple things there, and they can also build down here should the need arise. But Sydney and Calcutta, they can't build a major factory. They can't upgrade until they're actually at war with Japan, and then they can build capital ships. But before that time, they are unable to do so. So that's pretty much it. I don't think I'm forgetting anything else right now. The Russians just backed off of everything except going into Finland, and that's pretty much it. So Greece still stands. It's looking like a pretty good Allied game right now, but it's really early. And if Japan can put China to bed in a couple of turns here, that'll free them up to do a whole bunch of problem stuff down here. We'll show you the board, and I think we updated it. I think it's updated. So there you go. That's what everybody's making right now. So the 66, 81, 130, so like 133 or something for the Axis, and considerably more for the Allies. Both the Russians, they rolled well. They rolled a 17, and the Americans rolled a 17 as well, because they went from 25 to 42, and I know that the Soviets were at 13. The +4 there, that's the territory that they have taken. So they took Poland, the Baltic states, and Viipuri up in Finland. Americans can't take territory yet, of course, and so there's no plus for them. The Chinese plus is for, of course, the Burma Road, which is in most iterations of World War II games, because we know how important that was to keeping nationalist China in the war. All the supplies, the food, the ammunition, the medicine, all the rest that came up that road from India. Huge. That's pretty much it. So yeah, a couple of highlights would be the French Foreign Legion getting into it, and the Italian fleet gonzo, but the British fleet fairly in trouble here with the Germans having a few units they can come down here and do something about. And I counted after they left, the German bombers here can actually reach as well, those 3 bombers. They can actually reach this fleet and land in Tobruk. So it'll be interesting to see if a German player sees that. And that would make short work of the Brits. So, well, thanks for watching, folks. And like I say, we'll hopefully film this very shortly. But for you, it'll be just a blink of an eye. All right, take care. We'll see you for round 3. All right, folks, here we are at the end of round 3. And we'll let Bob Seeger kind of take us back a bit. But here we are. Lots going on. Not much in the Atlantic, of course, because the Germans decided to vacate the Atlantic wholesale. They have spent 0 funds. And so Britain is running amok, as it were, in the Atlantic. And the Canadians are doing their thing. You can see they actually landed here. The Dieppe raid was actually a success in this one. And as we know, the Dieppe raid was a success because the British scientists got a look at the Enigma and the German radar and whatnot that they were looking at, but that was protected information. If you ever want to go back and read about them, they're all declassified now, but it took about 70 years or something to declassify it. On a personal note, the Dieppe raid in August of 1942, there was a captain who was on board one of the landing craft for the Canadians. And he was killed that morning along with about 960 other Canadians. And it was a very, very bloody day for Canada, but we still hold them in deep respect. A lot of things went wrong that day for them on the beaches, but it was just not good. About 5,000 Canadians landed and less than half actually returned. It's pretty bad. But the neat thing, I'm just going to turn down the music a little bit. The connection I have with Dieppe is a very personal one. 6 weeks after this happened, a little boy was born, and he was named after the captain. The captain's name is Douglas Gordon Purdy, and so they named this young boy Douglas Gordon Purdy, who happened to be my father. And then years later, they wanted to carry that tradition, so they called me Kurt and Douglas Gordon Purdy, and then the name Douglas goes with my son as well. So we've tried to carry that on throughout the generations here. So it's 3 generations after the captain, Douglas Gordon Purdy, died on Dieppe. We're still carrying on that name. So many of you have even stronger ties to people in World War II, but it's about as close as I can get. Of course, my grandfather on my mother's side was a navigator on a Halifax bomber for the Royal Canadian Air Force, under Bomber Command, of course. And my other grandfather was working actually in the Cold War. He ended up being a spy for the Secret Service. The Canadian Secret Service was run by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Until they were found to have a whole bunch of illegal wiretaps, kind of the Canadian Watergate, I guess. And so they got their license pulled by the government, and we created another security intelligence service that probably does worse things. But hey, what can you do? Back to the game. Just wanted to mention that, though. And that's why the Canadians landed there. A little tie-in I thought was nice. They also took Bordeaux. I'm not expecting to hold it, of course, just looking to distract the Germans, because the Germans decided to open up a second front. Well, I guess at the time it was just a first front, but so they went in wholesale. They activated northern part of Finland there, took back Viipuri, and then invaded, and they actually were able to take Leningrad, and then the Russians had to come back in and take it back. But we'll see if they can hold it. I mean, the Germans don't have a lot in the area, and they've only got 1 transport, so the Russians will probably hold on to it, and they've got a lot of resources to take it right back. There is something in this game called Scorched Earth, and Scorched Earth is very simply at the end of your turn, if you have a facility or a factory, so like an air base or a naval base or a factory, that you don't want to fall into enemy hands, you can just Zorch it. Just get rid of it. So typically when we start the game, Hong Kong has 2 naval ports here. And when the British evacuate, you usually get rid of them. This last turn, got rid of that port there. And depending on what the Japanese are doing, you typically get rid of that one, because they're going to come and use them eventually. And sometimes even these two say goodnight. But we'll get back to the review here. Just wanted to mention the Scorched Earth because neither, you have to own it for a whole turn. So Germany didn't hold it for a whole turn, and Russia hasn't held it for a whole turn. So the air base and the naval base remain. The fortification, of course, was gone after the German attack. But they also attacked in Pskov and got pushed back by superior Soviet numbers. And in the south, though, looks like they definitely have the advantage because they got all these tanks. And yeah, have a lot of fun there. A little bit of infantry support, not much. The Luftwaffe is a shadow of its former self, but they still have some tacticals there. And then they also have a couple tacticals down here in Africa. As you can see, the French Foreign Legion continues to march on, and the Italians have decided to turtle in Tobruk in order to build up their strength. And they could build 3 units a turn down here, and then they can also fly anything down, or if they ever get enough money together and have enough support to bring in ships, they'll do that. But for right now, this is it for Italy. And of course the British are going to outbuild them because the British can afford a lot. Again, this game is really looking like an Allied victory already. There's whispers about only going one more round, but we'll see. Because if the Germans have a ton of cash. Let's just go up to the board here, a little higher up now. So you can see the 67 bucks. Right, there's still the kings, and 56 for the Japanese. The Italians are hurting for certain. The Soviets, of course, got their full income when they got invaded, but they've lost a couple bucks worth of territory. And the British are doing very well. The British are extremely healthy, mainly because the Italians are taking it on the chin. The Japanese haven't engaged anybody but the Chinese, and you can kind of tell because Far East Command's at 31 and Anzac's getting 20, and China's down to 11, including their bonus. So we'll talk about them in a second. You may have noticed the 2 red tanks here. Those are KV-1, and they can move to, they cost the same as regular tanks. This is where the Russians get a little bit of a help from the game mechanics, and that is the KV-1 actually attack at an 8. And they can move 2, but they can't blitz, so they can't take 2 territories at once. So they are a little bit slower, but you'd probably have infantry support anyway because you don't want them getting destroyed. But we'll see if there's going to be enough for them to hold on, because they do fight all this stuff, and the Romanians, Bulgarians, and Hungarians also bring in extra units. And because the Germans have essentially the ability to prosecute a war way up north, and then in the center and in the south, the Russians can't just go wherever they want. They've got to be quite cognizant of things. But that's really that's the only problem on the western side of the board. We've already shown you Africa, and the Germans did come down here and sink the rest of that big British fleet that was all pretty much banged up. But as the Royal Navy is known to do, it has lots and lots and lots of ships in reserve, so they're probably going to be heading into the Med here to cause 6 kinds of grief. This Yugoslav destroyer is still a Yugoslav destroyer. It just sits there because it's pro-Allied, and it's a navy that's it's going to go to whoever gets in there for the Allies. Right now it just doesn't get activated. So some people play that it goes to the nearest Allied port. We kind of said that doesn't make a lot of sense. That, you know, Germany takes that and then this thing skitters over here, and all of a sudden you got a free destroyer for Germany attacking Yugoslavia. So we always thought we'll just leave it there until somebody sinks it, or the Allies get into Yugoslavia, then they can grab it. It's our house rule. We kind of like it. And I'm sure many people have many house rules with games this large. Over here to the Horn of Africa, the Italians were banged up. We had this transport here, came down here and picked up the tank and the South African infantry and brought them back, landed here. We had another 2 here, and then we had the 3 British infantry come in to Ethiopia. Never took a hit here, and took one there, or took a hit here, no hits here. And the other transport that was here moved 2 over to here. The British transport that was here, or British Far East Command transport that was here, went 1, 2 to there. The Anzac transport that was sitting here grabbed the 2 guys and brought them over here to Singapore, hoping to cause a little bit of grief for the Japanese, as they're no doubt going to be heading south. Singapore is a victory city. Burma Road is still open, but just very tenuously, but those are there. And you can see a stack of tanks here and a good stack of men, and the artillery and the fortification. For the fortification, if you don't know, it takes up to 10 infantry class units, and they defend at a +1 for the first round. Plus the defense gives you 2. But this only works, and this is a huge point of contention with some players, but it's quite clear in the rules that this does not defend on its own. You got to have at least 1 infantry in there for it to work. Otherwise, it's just a big concrete box. It doesn't do anything. So you have to have infantry class units in there. So they could be, commandos. They could be, Marines, whatever. So, or just regular infantry. Japanese built another factory here. So now they have 1, 2, 3 factories on the mainland. China decided to come back here, and I didn't count that, but I think it's close to 3 billion. And we have all these troops here just pushing in. It's inevitable, folks. It's just how much time, money, and energy are the Japanese willing to spend on that. The Anzac, sensing an opportunity, have moved everybody from here up to the Philippines. The Japanese only have a carrier, loaded, but a carrier, and a couple of cruisers, and then a whole whack of transports. Where did everybody go? Well, everybody go over here. And here we have the Japanese. Now, the Japanese are not allowed to stop next to continental U.S. So the Japanese, until they're at war, of course. And so for right now, the Japanese must remain off the shore. They couldn't go here, 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 here. They can go to Hawaii if they want. They can sit off Midway, Wake. And so for this, the Japanese are now in a beautiful position because they're here in 135, and they can go 2 spaces. They can go 1, 2, and they can invade here. They can go 1, 2 and attack here and get that major bonus where the American ships don't retaliate on the first round, and for the rest of the battle they're -2. They could also land in BC and just say, hey, America, but they can't actually do that without declaring war, so they can't do that. They could come up here and take Alaska. They've only got 6 units on here, so it wouldn't be much of an attack. The American player decided to answer by building 2 fighters and 2 tacticals, because after the battle, the Japanese fleet will definitely be in range, and they'll go exact some revenge, and that'll probably even the score a bit. So that was a smart play there. The Japanese, if they want to attack up here, they'll have... This is D12 system, so we'll have 2 at 4, 2 at 6, and 2 at 8. And they've got a couple of tips. So it's only 6 shots that they're going to get. And the 4s, 6s, 50% chance. 8s, of course, better chance. And then everybody's a -2 here on defense. And 2 of these are transports, so they're kind of useless. The planes aren't hit with the same negative -2, only the ships. So at least they'll be able to defend a little better. So the Japanese player at this point doesn't have great positioning to take out the US fleet. They would probably want to get to this zone right here, and then they can reach out and hit pretty much everywhere except here. So that might be a better one there, actually, because then they can go anywhere. But we'll see where they decide to go and see what the response is. And we'll see actually if they decide to open up the floodgates here and start a war, or are they going to go one more round after China and see what happens. Alright, so thanks for watching. End of round 3. We're going to do round 4 here and get right back to you. And we'll let you know what round 4 looks like. Maybe cross your fingers for these poor Italians. Well, folks, looks like the gang here is going to call it, partly due to time and partly due to the fact that looks like the axis it's going to be too long of an uphill climb, and it doesn't look like they have the horses to do it. We're going to take you through some of the things. One, Italy is out of Africa. They got wiped out, so they have no ships, and with the British fleet having not even done their non-com yet, they just kind of did their non-com, their flight back here, but they didn't even put their build on. This is their build. That's going in Cairo, and that's going to go in London. This is the dead from the last thing, and you're probably thinking, what in the world? Major? Where did that come from? Well, I'll tell you. Those plucky Canadians. They did it. Of course, with tons of British help, but the Canadians landed in Western Germany and took it. Thanks to a lot of help from the Royal Air Force, who lost a fighter to the AA there. But they were able to land 5 boatloads of stuff. And they ended up having 5 things survive, so they ended up losing 6 units. But they were obviously able to capture it. There's nothing in Berlin, nothing in Stettin, and just infantry in France. So it's not looking really good there. Now, of course, the Germans have a ton of cash. They could build 10 units there and 10 units there, like 10 infantry on each, and be all right. But with Britain going to be shipping over that many each turn, and the resurgent Soviets, because the Soviets took back Murmansk. Last turn, I don't know if we mentioned that Britain was able to take Oslo back, and then they took these 2 troops down to there instead of up to Narvik. And the Germans have really kind of shot their wad up here. There's not much left going on. These KV-1s came in handy. They had 3 rounds of battle versus 3 or 4 rounds of battle, and they got 2 hits each and every round, rolling at an 8. They're glad they built another couple. And they built a stack of infantry here and a stack of infantry and guards units here in order to just block the northern route, which turned out to be not a big deal. They took Leningrad back, of course. There was just 1 German infantry, I believe. Now the Germans have a little bit of a force here. This one here, though, is where there's 6 tanks and I think 4 mech were there. So they lost 10 units right there and only took out some infantry. A lot of infantry, mind you, but all they took out was infantry. So maybe some artillery too, but not really a fair fight. And the Germans just don't have enough stuff here. They built some fancy stuff, though. There's a big Tiger tank there, and then we have some SS Panzer divisions, a couple of them. You can build